So today I thought we would talk about all the things that I made in January. I made 3 things, 2 of which were fairly intensively tailored coats and a shirt. So, you know, 3 things, but two fairly big projects. I am happy with 2 of the 3. I have plans to fix the things that I am not happy with about the 3rd. So I was planning on taking January very easy, taking January as, you know, kind of like a holiday month because of the craziness at the end of the year for my schedule, and I definitely did that. I had a huge pile of projects on my desk that were cut out or half cut out or needing to be done or finished or have like the final piece made because the wearable muslin had worked out really well, and I had wanted to try and do all of them. That did not happen, but as I say, I was planning on taking January as a holiday, so it kind of worked out quite well. The very first thing that I got done was my red coat. Bear with me a second. So this is the McCall's 6800, and I have made another one of those, the green velvet that you can just about see back there, and that's down here because I need to alter that one as well. I made that one sort of like butt height or butt length, and I have discovered because of this one that that is really not a good length for my preferred style of dressing and the way that I like to look when I put my outerwear on. So I am planning a refashion project for the green velvet coat, and that will be coming at some point, and it's going to be a over-the-top elaborate beaded evening coat because it is velvet, so why not? Let's lean into it. To start on that project, I needed to alter the patterns because I had only traced out that length of coat. Now I did that because the green velvet that I had was actually my sister-in-law's curtains, so I had a finite amount of it, and obviously velvet has a nap, so you have to be very careful about how you cut things out. The length of coat that I went for previously was the length of coat that I actually could make with the fabric I had available. I'd only traced that short coat length, and there were a lot of pieces in this coat. It is an intensive project. I had put off lengthening all of the pattern pieces for the longest time, but I bought myself this red wool from Lady McElroy. It is called Campbell. They don't have any more of this specific colour, but I will list to their wool coatings down below. This is 80% wool, 20% polyamide. I love it. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I have a couple of colours of it, and I would highly recommend. It is about £20 a metre, and I have used about 6 meters in this coat, so this is an expensive coat, no doubt about it, because I've also used a cotton silk spoonflower lining as well. First things first, I needed to trace out the pattern pieces to lengthen them to the length that I wanted, and then I needed to cut those pieces out of calico, just the lengthened pieces for the green coat. Once I'd done that, I could then stick the pattern pieces together so that I could cut out this red coat with obviously no seam in the skirt because it wasn't needed. It's going to be needed for that one, but it obviously isn't needed for this one. I got that all done, cut everything out, and I started with the things that I hate doing first. So I don't overly like cutting out the interfacing and all the structural layers and things like that. I tend to cut out the wool first, then the lining, and then move on to those pieces. I also interlined this coat, so that was another thing that I had to do. I just flipped it on its head and did the things I like least first, and it actually worked out really well, and I got this coat cut out in a day. That was a good 4 hours of work. Like I say, labour intensive, but that was a really good tip for me to do the things I like least first because it just got done that way, and I didn't put it off till the last minute or until I actually needed, say, the pieces of interfacing. For me, I use this book, and I have absolutely loved this book. Now technically it is for like jackets, but the principles work really well for tailoring coats as well. I use the speed tailoring techniques, so it's all fusible tailoring pieces that I have in here, not any of the pad stitching or things like that. I would like to experiment in that at some point in the future, but for now speed tailoring has given me some very lovely results, so I was very happy to use that. I got my interfacing from Tailor Mouse. Thank you very much to Lynn for the recommendation, because the English couture company, the lady that owned that, has retired, so I could no longer get it from my usual source. Tailor Mouse had the very same thing that I needed, the weft interfacing, I think it's called. It's coat weight interfacing. It's absolutely amazing. I have used it in all of my coat projects since This one actually, yeah, the very first one that my very first sort of like attempt at a tailored coat. I love how this has turned out. There were a few things that I changed in the pattern as well as the length. The original coat doesn't have a back neckline facing. The lining just goes straight up to the back collar, which is totally fine, but just not my preference. So I have drafted and added in this back facing. It also meant that I had somewhere to put my label, which I like. I usually hate labels on clothes because I find them really irritating in the back of my neck, but because it's a coat, I'll have other layers between me and the label, so I like to put them in my coats. The other thing that I did was add a little bit of extra room at the top here, so there's tiny little pleat there just for a little bit of ease of movement, because otherwise the pattern would have you do the exact same lining pieces as the outer pieces of the coat, which is not a preference of mine. I have noticed on this one back here that the seam is kind of, it's starting to spread, because when you put a coat on, you need the lining to be slightly bigger so that it's just got some wiggle room so that it can rub against the different things that you are wearing underneath of it. So that little extra kick pleat there is a really good thing to put into all of your coats. Again, the book talks you through that. The other thing that I did was draft. I've got dust all over this. This coat is really heavy, so picking it up I do tend to end up dragging on the floor, but I have drafted a hem facing for this coat. This is a circular hem. Most coat patterns with circular hems, not all, but the big four for example, do tend to have you fold that up and gather sort of that top edge here and ease it in, because obviously when you turn a circular hem up, you are turning a larger circumference into a smaller circumference, so there will be some puckers and gathers in that. It's not my preference, I don't like it, so I tend to draft hem facings for this. You guys have asked for a tutorial for that, so there is one coming. The other thing that I don't like is leaving the lining free from the coat outer, because some coats will have you leave the two separate and put them together with like bar tacks or thread bars. So you anchor it in place so that it doesn't completely go out of place, but if you go down to the bottom of the coat you can see inside of the coat. Again, that is because you don't want your lining to pull and pucker on the outer of your coat. If it's not big enough in such a way that it will allow for that extra wiggle room for the lining in the inside of the coat, then you can end up with a weird looking hem because the lining is pulling on the coat outer and things can get out of whack. So I have still cut the lining pieces in the same way that I cut the outer pieces. So the lining is actually as long as the coat, and then we've got a 4-inch coat facing or hem facing here, and that's sewn to that. And that just means that there is like an extra fold of fabric when the lining is worn. It kind of pulls over. I'm holding this upside down so it's difficult to see, but it pulls over and you have that extra sort of couple of inches of wiggle room on the lining of the coat, which is what you need to, like I say, not have the lining pull weirdly on the outer of the coat and show. So I have used a cotton silk blend from Spoonflower, and it has chocolate biscuits all over it for the main body of the coat lining. But for the sleeves, I actually went for a lotus lining, which is an acetate viscose blend from Lady McElroy. I did that because this is much slipperier than the cotton silk. The cotton silk has a nice kind of sheen and slip to it, but it's not slippery enough for my preference for sleeves. And sleeves are the bit that you are really kind of like yanking on and moving around when you put your coat on and off. They're the bits that are going to tug and stick and catch to whatever you're wearing underneath of your coat. So you want your sleeve lining to be as slippery as possible. This is the chocolate coloured acetate viscose lotus lining that I got from Lady McElroy, and the very lovely Charlotte actually sent me the money for that. I got a little bit extra so I could do the sleeves on this coat, and then I have the rest of it for my Burdadurndal, which is happening, and it was one of the projects that I had on my list for January but just didn't get to. There are a few extra pieces of interfacing put into the collar, and there is some, I don't know what shape they are, but there's some extra pieces of interfacing that get put in here. I've also drafted a backstay for this, which I cut out of calico. They're all extra little pieces that the tailoring book that I mentioned, talk you through doing and drafting and using the original pattern that you have, this one, to then get those extra pieces. And I do think they have made quite the difference to this coat. I absolutely love this thing. It is incredibly heavy. I think I mentioned it, but I have also fully interlined this with cotton flannel as well. So we have a wool layer, cotton flannel layer and then the lining layer, and then different parts of it do have interfacing in it as well. This is heavy. It's not heavy when it's worn, but when you're just holding it with one hand, this is a heavy thing. It is a beast of a coat. I mean, it is very long, and there's six and a bit meters of wool in here as well, like I say, so it's not surprising that it's heavy, but it is a heavy coat. It's also a lot of coat to maneuver in because the skirt is so big. Now, I don't mind that. I'm used to that. That's the kind of coat that I like, so I am willing to have that giant coat, or that skirt of that coat that I have to sort of maneuver around, especially when I'm driving, and I have to be careful to make sure that I'm not dragging the skirt of the coat on the car door when I'm getting in and out of the car, kind of thing, or, you know, the sill of the car where the door closes, because that bit can get muddy, and I have ended up with little bits of like stuff on previous coats, so it's just something that I do bear in mind when I wear this one. I have worn it out a couple of times and I absolutely love it. Mum, Dad and I went up to the range on the north of the island to go and get Dad some art supplies. He has very much got back into painting and he's loving it. I was wearing this coat and a very kind gentleman came up to me, and his first thing he said, he was like, "I'm not hitting on you, but I just wanted to say you don't see coats like that every day. It's amazing. It fits you so well. It's such a lovely colour." And he didn't let me get a word in edgeways. I was just like like this, and Mum came up behind him, tapped him on the shoulder and went, "She made it." Like this. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing." And then another gentleman started like chiming in. He was like, "You made that? That's so cool." And this lady was like, "I saw you earlier. It's a gorgeous coat." And I ended up with like a group of people around me just being like, "Your coat looks amazing." It was like, "Oh, that's so lovely, thank you." So it's definitely one of those conversation starters with it being such a bright colour as well. One of the reasons I went for such a bright colour is I don't have another coat that is a bright colour. All of my other coats are very subdued, and if they're not subdued, they're very autumnal colours, which is a palette that I really like and works for me because it is a warm palette. But as we know, I think I might have told you once or twice, I've had my colours done and I am a spring, and this kind of orangey red is a really great colour for me. And I waited to buy the wool, this wool, because I bought 8.5 meters of it. There will be another project coming in this later this year, but I waited to buy the wool until I'd had my colours done, so that I was either going to buy this one or a much more muted kind of not even cranberry, maroon. It was a darker red. I'm so glad I went for this one. I absolutely love it. One final thing, one of my favourite techniques, and you really can't see it very well on this one because I went for a maroon coloured piping, but I love flat piping the facing between the lining and the facing of the coat. I think it's just such a lovely touch. You'll be able to see it better on the second coat that I did because I went for a bright yellow. I should maybe have gone for a cream because of these creamy biscuits in the lining fabric, but I didn't have any in stock and I didn't want to wait. I wanted to get this coat done. All in all, it probably took me about 10 days of sewing. I didn't time myself and I probably did maybe a couple of hours a day because, as I say, I was taking January very easy. It was 10 days from tracing out the pattern, well, from altering the pattern, cutting out the bits for that one, altering the pattern again, getting everything cut out, and then sewing it. It did become very unwieldy. When I was sewing in the sleeves, it took about 5 passes to sew the sleeves in. Usually what I would do, if a coat has a waist seam, I would sew everything in the upper half before putting the skirt of the coat on so that it isn't as heavy and unwieldy to move under the machine. But obviously this one doesn't have a waist seam, so the entirety of the coat was pretty much together when I set the sleeves in. So I didn't try and maneuver the coat underneath the machine. I got the coat as flat as I could. I backstitched and stitched as much as I could without having to rearrange everything. By the time that I got to a point where I could feel resistance, I backstitched again. I then took the coat out from under the needle, moved everything around outside of it, got it positioned back under the needle again, and did another section of the sleeve, and that's worked out really well. I do have one minute pucker in the sleeve cap, but the other thing is I've also got shoulder pads in here as well as sleeve head, so it kind of actually, if I didn't point it out to you, I very much doubt anybody would notice. I don't know if you can tell I've waffled for about 17 minutes according to the camera. I'm really pleased with this coat. It's warm, it's bright, it's long, it's full, so it goes over all my giant dresses. So yeah, I'm so happy with this one. Absolutely love it. And I do have plans for the remainder of the wool that I have for another type of coat, which will be very different. So yeah, very pleased with this one. Now I've got to try and hang it back up again, and it is a beast of a coat. So as I mentioned, I did want to try and work through all the projects that I had ready and cut out to go on my table, and I got to this shirt. I cut this out back in August last year. I had 5 meters of this fabric. I did make this 8177 dress, which I absolutely love. With what I had left, I had enough to do the 9345 shirt, and there is a video about the 9345 pattern and how to make that one shirt dress work really hard for you. One of the hacks that I did to the pattern is to turn it into a shirt that has no waist seam and goes about 4 inches below the waist, which is what I've done with this one. I really like it. As I say, I only had enough fabric left to do something like this. I probably could have got a 5951 dress out of it, and that would have been nice. I probably, thinking about it now, should have gone down that route rather than making a shirt, because I've told you guys many times I very rarely wear separates. They are not my favourite. If I'd had enough to make this into a shirt dress, I totally would have done that, because it would have been different enough to the strappy sundress, but fabric was finite, and this fabric I'd bought years ago from the textile centre. So shirt, I absolutely love this shirt. This also has some really nice kind of little tan flex in it, so it will look really good with the tan skirt and waistcoat that I'm planning on making. It will also look great with some of the cream pieces, as long as the fabric isn't too dark and doesn't sort of shadow underneath of these pieces. These are lined. I think I'm going to get away with it, but I'm not 100% sure. But I really like the idea of wearing this under a dress, a pinafore dress, which I do have back here. I don't know how often this is going to get worn, but I am really pleased that it has now been made up and isn't just sitting there as cut out pieces, because these sleeves and the pattern pieces for these sleeves were getting very bent and creased and crumpled just sitting on the table in pieces. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be a super versatile or often worn piece in my wardrobe, but for what fabric I had left and knowing what I did at the time, I'm happy with it. I think it's a nice shirt. I like it. And then the final thing that I got sewn in January is another coat. Mum very much wanted to make a coat this year. She particularly wanted to make the 1669. We discussed this in December. We'd picked fabrics, and Mum had even agreed to take a week off of her other responsibilities so that we could do it together in the sewing room over that week and get it done, get it made, get it videoed for you guys. And yeah, we came to do it, and she changed her mind. She changed her mind completely about the coat that she wanted to make. Mum's complete opposite to me. She doesn't want the full skirted coats. She wants something very streamlined, because she doesn't like having to try and manage the skirt of a giant coat. It's not her favourite. Also, Mum is 5'4", and she feels that those very large skirts drown her, so she prefers something much more streamlined. So despite having agreed on the 1669, she decided that she wanted to do something else. Now that's fine. I wanted to do the 1669, but my plans for that were to be done in December this year, or later, November, December this year, because of the collection that I wanted to work on next, which will also be my next video coming up very soon. That is the Anaconda Antithesis fabric that I wanted to base a collection around. Whilst technically the dark green coat would work with it, I didn't have a lining that would tie it in, and this is just another weird example of how my brain works. So I don't know if you'll remember, but back in 2022 I made the Deer and Doe Les-on trench coat in a black cotton brushed twill, which I absolutely loved and never wore. And it's because I just don't like wearing black. I prefer brighter colours. I feel more me in brighter colours. But the coat was beautiful, and it was something that I did want to revisit. I gave the coat to Mum, the black trench coat to Mum, and she wears it quite frequently. But for her next coat, there were a few tweaks that she wanted to make. The bodice was too long for her, the sleeves were too long for her. She also didn't like the fullness in the skirt from the pleats. So we took all those things out and have made Mum an amazing coat. I can't show you it. I will at some point, I promise, but Mum is currently wearing it and out, and she's been wearing it ever since she finished it. Now, I had fully intended to do the Les-on trench coat in the Anaconda Antithesis collection from this 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 cream wool. So I had 3 meters of this cream wool. I bought it as a remnant from Lady McElroy 4, 5, 6 years ago, quite a while ago now. It was one of their January deals where they were like, if you spend 80 quid you can have any Lady McElroy remnant for free. This was listed as Lady McElroy wool and it was a remnant. They had 3 meters of it. I asked for it and they gave it to me, which I was amazed by. It is absolutely beautiful wool and I kind of wish they'd had more because I was very limited by what I could make with it. I did try and get the Lezon trench coat out of the 3 meters that I had, but one of the things that I wanted to change about the Lezon was the length of it. The length was slightly too short for my preferences, and honestly the skirt is probably not as full or as floofy as I would like, especially for some of the things I want to wear underneath of it, and we've all seen the giant dresses that I own. So I decided to pivot and try the Gertie princess coat. This is my 3rd Gertie princess coat. I only had enough for a shorter one. Now this is not the peplum that comes with the pattern. This is a peplum I drafted myself from the skirt portion. It's 2 inches shorter at the front than it is at the back. It is literally the length that I had available. I couldn't have made this coat any longer because I just didn't have the fabric. Also, my fabric had a couple of sun damage lines on it from where it had been folded, and it was definitely damage that had happened after I received the fabric because it was of the way it's been folded. It wasn't from storing it in here, it's from where it used to be stored, because lots of people have been worried about sun damage for my fabrics back here, but they're not under any direct light and the sun doesn't even get this far back into the room, so it wasn't sun damage from living in here. But there were a few bleached marks, basically bleached white marks that I had to cut around. So I managed to get this coat out of the 3 meters that I have, and I've got literal scraps left. I've maybe got a 20 centimeter square piece of fabric left after cutting out the self-covered buttons and everything, and I don't like it. I couldn't put my finger on why I didn't like it. I've tried it on over some of my big dresses, and my theory was that the peplum would, you know, it would go in at the waist and then the peplum would sit nicely on top of the big dresses and it would look awesome, and I just don't like it. I don't like this length of coat on me, and it's now I realise the length of coat rather than the kind of style. I like a high-low hem, but I need to make it a much more dramatic high-low hem if I'm going to do that. The green velvet coat and this coat are going to have some surgery done on them to make them longer. I'm going to do them both with velvet. Now when I mentioned that on the live stream for this that this coat got featured in, a couple of people were like, why velvet? Why not just get more wool? They don't have any more of this wool, otherwise I probably would have gone back and bought an extra couple of meters back then, because I like longer coats. I like coats that either crop directly at the waist or longer coats. I did think about taking the peplum off and making this stop at the waist, but I think it might look too top heavy for my preferences. I think I will prefer a longer coat, so I am going to change this one. This one is not perfect. It's lovely. I think it fits really well. The 2 coats that I'm wearing today, I've only literally got this shirt on underneath of them, but I can get a big one of my chunky cardigans on underneath of those and be comfortable and move my arms and things still, so they do fit, and I think fit me nicely. I think I've done them justice in the kind of shape that I've gone for and the wearing ease that I prefer. I know everybody has very different definitions of what wearing ease should be on certain garments, and for me they fit the way that I want them to. Yeah, I'm not overly enamoured with the bottom of this one, but I'm going to fix it. Something else that I tried with this one is I added cuffs on to the sleeves. These cuffs came from a butterick pattern, and I will put a picture up on screen and list to the butterick pattern in the description down below. And again, anything that I can list to, I will list to in the description down below. I really like how these came out. I tried it on and Dad immediately said, what's that Will Ferrell movie? And he meant Elf. He's christened this my elf coat. I like it. I really like it. I like the cuff detail. I like the collar. Again, this is an ivory or a cream shade, so it works really well with my season. I'm a spring, mentioned that already. So this is, you know, a great neutral for me. As I say, I wanted this to be part of the Anaconda Antithesis collection, so I've used the Lena lining, which is a polyester crepe fabric from Lady McElroy. This is in the Dawn colorway. I think Minerva Crafts have a little bit of this left, but there's lots of the Dusk colorway, which just has these navy flowers here. They're actually a kind of a rich reddy brown in the Dusk colorway, so that's the only difference, is one flower is a slightly different color. I've gone for, as you can I think see, a pop of yellow piping, flat piping on this coat, and I absolutely love how that's turned out. So I have ordered some swatches of cream velvet from Textile Express. They've arrived. I've picked my color. I am going to trace out the bottom of these peplum pieces that I've made so that they're the same length as the original princess coat, because that's a really good length for me. I might make it a touch longer, just a touch, but I really do like my, I've got two princess coats, both of which one is black with, to be fair, rainbow colors all over it, and the other one is khaki, which is lovely, but it's much more an autumn color and it looks great on mum and she loves it. But yeah, this one I might make it a slightly longer than the originals, but we're talking maybe a couple of inches, because obviously the longer I make it, the more velvet I've got to buy. And again, velvet has a nap, so it's going to be very fabric hungry, because the bottom of these panels is going to be the big pattern pieces. It'll be fine, I'll make it work. The other thing I'm thinking of doing because of that velvet would be, I mean, ideally you would make the collar and the cuffs in velvet as well to kind of tie everything together. I've trimmed and graded the seams on this thing to within an inch of their life, and they're sitting nice and flatly, and I don't want to unpick all of that. I don't want to take the entirety of the lining out and have to remake the lining, and I mean theoretically I could, because if I'm doing it in velvet, but the thought of trying to deal with those tiny graded seams does not appeal. So I'm going to take the self-covered buttons off, and I'm going to do some more self-covered buttons in the velvet to try and tie that in. I might do some like velvet appliques that are shaped on the side. I'm going to play around with it. It might end up having nothing done. I might get some appliques. I'm not sure. I'm going to try and tie in the bottom of the coat with the top of the coat, at the very least, by doing the self-covered buttons in velvet rather than in the cream wool that they now currently are. I did buy more of the lining as well, because I had 4 meters of this lining. It was a present from a friend for a birthday 3 or 4 years ago, and once I got this cut out, I was convinced I was going to like it, so I cut the rest out as a 3/4 circle skirt. And so I only had scraps left to then line a Sorrento jacket. I was just like, how am I going to handle the lining of this, because I really don't want to do a different, like a solid, or yeah, it just no good. So very lovely tier, tracked down this particular colorway of the exact same fabric, and I have bought 2.5 meters of it, because it doesn't need to be, it's not directional, obviously it doesn't have a nap, so I can nest the pattern pieces. So I am going to put a seam in the lining as well. The only thing that I will have to, I'm going to piece those as well. I will have to just unpick the flat piping, and I can just do a join there as well and carry the flat piping all the way down to the hem of the coat. So 2 tailored coats, 1 shirt, and I like 2 of the 3 pieces. But now I know that I need a very specific length of coat if it's not going to be a sort of calf length or full length coat on me. As I mentioned, I'm going to be making a Sorrento jacket, which is obviously cropped at the waist. I do have some more of the red fabric that I want to use this Vogue pattern for, and I'm going to make a muslin first and see how that turns out. I also have the Angela Clayton McCall's jacket pattern on my list of things I want to make on my Make 9 this year. I've already done a muslin for it, which needs a lot of work, but that peplum is much shorter, and I'm wondering if that's going to work for me. So I have a couple of options for the red fabric. I do kind of really want to do the biker jacket, but it might end up being a cropped biker jacket rather than the biker jacket exactly like the Vogue pattern, which is a dupe of an Alexander McQueen runway piece. I'm going to have to still experiment to find that sweet spot, because in my head these things are going to look amazing, but if they don't actually work on my body, then obviously I need to pivot and change and adapt so that they will work for my figure in the way that I like to get dressed. So yeah, 3 pieces. Happy with all of them. in terms of construction. Not quite so happy with the cream coat because of a few issues, but if I'd have had more of the wool, if I'd have had more of that fabric, I would have just made a longer coat and it would have been awesome to start with. So, you know, you live and you learn. I'm glad that I tried it because I really don't think it would have made the perfect Lezon trench coat. I don't like that length on me. I am going to revisit the Lezon trench coat, but I want to lengthen that a lot. I think that would be a much more me shape and style. So at some point in the future, and I do have fabrics for it, I will revisit the Lezon trench coat, and I'm going to fully line it as well because, again, just a preference of mine. I prefer fully lined things, especially in coats. It's just my preference. So at some point I will go back to it, but I'm not 100% sure when. You'll have to let me know in the comments section down below what you think of the things that I've made, which is your favourite. Mine is definitely the red coat. I absolutely love that thing. Close second with this one, and once that one is altered, I think it's going to be amazing, and I am going to be doing a video on altering those two coats and how I tackle it and why I make the decisions that I do, so that video will be coming soon. Then this shirt, I think it's an absolutely gorgeous shirt. I really like it. I just don't know how often I'm going to wear it, but we shall see. You never know, I may change my style completely this year and try different things. I mean, probably not, but stranger things have happened, right? If you've enjoyed this video, you might want to check out this one here.